Patrick,
Having me on for
I'm, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to our conversation. There's a lot of insights in terms of the journey you've been on, and I think a lot of people can relate because it's so easy to get stuck and get trapped by shame. And that's been my experience when I'm working with people in the addiction space. But in general, I think shame can be very debilitating. But then how do you navigate that? And I'm
hmm
sure we will go through that in your story as well. But before we get started with that, I do want to give you an opportunity with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what's brought you
Yeah,
here.
sure. So, let's see. I live in South Florida. Basically, I got into recovery from addiction at the age of 19, and kind of what got me there towards the end was probably for about the last year and a half, and shooting up heroin. So I was injecting heroin. I had been trying for about 6 months to try to kind of get clean on my own, trying all these different methods. Trying Patrick's way over and over, as you've heard a billion times, and I never did. Getting help, like going to rehab, doing like 12 steps, trying any of those. It's just, what can Patrick come up with? And basically, it took my parents coming home and finding me passed out on the living room couch while I was babysitting my two younger sisters. Heroin needle, belt around my arm, everything just laid out on the coffee table, just completely like uncharacteristic for how I normally had hidden it really well. So I think I kind of manifested that to happen because I've been dying to get help and trying to figure out, how do I ask my parents or tell them I have help? Like, do I tell them I have a pill addiction? Do I tell them the drinking's more out of control than they knew? Like, I was trying to find a gentle way to break it to them. And so that happened. And then the next day, they were on the phone with treatment centers. This was back in 2002. The summer of 2002, I walk downstairs. My mom's on the kitchen landline talking to rehab centers. And I just had this immense relief that I'm finally getting help. I stop living this lie. I can stop living this duality life and sick every single day I wake up and go to bed. And off the treatment I went, and I'm looking at 22 years sober now. I'm 42 years old. I got 19, and now I work as a nurse practitioner, and I work in substance abuse, and so I deal with people like me every single day, and I've been doing that for about 7 years.
Yeah,
Awesome. So that's
yeah,
kind of what got me here. And then I kind of hit another bottom a couple years ago. That got me into trying out working with a coach, and she just broke me open and opened to so many things. So I was like, I want to try to utilize this work and these methods with others that maybe don't have just substance abuse, because I've been helping people with addictions for 22 years. I was like, but what about other guys who don't have addiction issues that might be struggling with day-to-day stuff? So that's what kind of got me into doing this whole thing that we're doing.
yeah. No, I appreciate that. And as you shared, you were 19 at the time, but I'm curious to understand because 19, still pretty young.
Yeah.
It's tough, right? But it was hard for you to ask for help and then wait for someone else to kind of come and bring that help to you? Have you been able to understand that
I mean,
piece?
shame, like we were talking about before we started, I think
Yeah,
is just the biggest thing, because both
yeah,
my parents are pretty heavy drinkers. There's alcoholism throughout my family. Nobody's ever
yeah,
talking about shooting up dope and, putting coke, kind of like, again, this is kind of out there. And I had who was in rehab who I was running. And I asked him, I'm like, Chris, like, what are these meetings about that you've been to? Like, what is this and that? And he's like, oh, horrible. You don't want to mess with that stuff. And, let's just go do a thing. And so he kept kind of talking me out of it, but I knew deep inside, like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to keep doing this. But like, how do I just now kind of like get really sick for a week and a half, using other things more and trying to, okay, maybe I'm past the worst of it. And maybe I'll just sell the heroin, because that'll be smart. But I'm selling the heroin and I'm pinching out a little bit at a time, just a rainy day. And then I start the cycle
yeah,
all over again. But I was kind of like, when I was down in those deep, dark places, maybe now's the time to ask. I couldn't get the courage to. So to answer your question, like, I think just shame, And, for
mm,
me, my addiction started young, 10, 11 years old. So,
yeah, yeah. And that is tough. And I think what you're touching on is with your parents' alcohol use, not to, pass
of course.
judgment, that can make it tough too, right? Because everyone around you is in that escape mode, which kind of brings me to the next question around what you shared with when you're working with men. The substance use is just on the surface,
Yeah.
right? Like the addiction can manifest in so many different ways, and often we just focus on the substance use. How's your understanding evolved around addiction, and how has it helped your ability to work with other
Well, it
people?
seems like it's almost, you could always tie it back to some sort of trauma.
Yeah.
If you tell me your trauma, I might be like, really, that's it? Or I might think, holy, how did you survive that? But we all have our
Mm.
perception, as you know, of our trauma, right? Like I can tell you a bunch of trauma I had, and you'll probably get that was pretty bad, but that's not that
Mm.
bad compared to some other people. So does that really justify needing to escape and numb? And the answer is yes, because we're all individualized. So
Mhm.
like I had that need, and so I see other men doing the same thing. And as you, maybe it's gambling, maybe it's sex, maybe it's being a workaholic, a friggin' rageaholic, maybe. So I see it always tied back to something like really poor coping skills, and a lot of it is self-sabotage. It's a lot of, for whatever reason, subconsciously we may not even be aware of it, we're sabotaging ourselves. Why? Because we don't feel we're worthy. We don't think we deserve this and that. So we start to get some of those
Mm.
things back. And you've heard it a million times. People in recovery start to get those good things back. And then they just completely tear the structure down because it's like, well, it was getting a little too good. I'm used to the chaos. I'm used to the drama. Idle hands, causes distraction. So I think a lot of it too is like to get to a place where, which again, I got to again about 2 years ago, which is like, no, I'm worthy. I'm worth having these things. Like
Mhm.
there's no reason abundant in the universe for all of us to have everything that we just have to believe that we are entitled to it. Like we are worth having
Yeah.
that. And I didn't think that for the longest time, especially in my childhood. My childhood, the overall arching theme was insecurity, pure
Mm.
in my childhood and confused. And so I see a lot of men that have the same stuff going on, especially like you said with addiction, a lot of confusion with all kinds of things, right? That they're confused about. Am I sexual orientation? Am I maybe supposed to have children? Am I not supposed to have children? Like they have all kinds of reasons for why did this happen to me? Why was I mistreated this way as a young age? Because I'm a child. So why did this happen?
Yeah. 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 And what you're touching on is, again, the shame aspect. And one of the other things I've also seen is people don't even think that they would be worthy of doing recovery, right? That, oh, I'm not good enough to even do the steps. Like I'm capable of it or I'm a failure. And to your, even if they're making progress, they'll beat themselves down and regress just to be able to have that reinforcement that, see,
Mm-hmm.
I knew it. I'm not capable of it.
Yeah, they
So
kind of set
it is
themselves up for failure.
important. Yeah. Yeah. And it's important that this is why I like recovery groups, because you're able to not only put it on the table and open it up for reflection, but then it also allows you to see other people also struggling in similar ways, right? So your story on the surface may be different. What you're struggling with deeper down is pretty much the same. And often it is through trauma, but at the end of the day, we're all seeking some sort of
Mm-hmm.
connection.
Exactly.
And that probably brings us to the next phase. As you said, you had another moment a couple years ago. Are you able to elaborate on that? And then we can follow up through what what that's brought
Yeah, of
forward
course. So
for
again, I
you
was
in terms of
19,
work.
20, and I was just noticing like I'm doing recovery stuff. I got this great job, great income. I have a beautiful girlfriend. I live on here like, 5 minutes from the beach. Like I have a great house, great car. Like I have all the outside external stuff. But
Yeah.
on the inside, I still talk horribly to myself. I still put myself down whenever I make any tiny little mistake. I don't know how to take compliments from people. When people compliment me, I'm always deflecting them, going, yeah, but it was just because of this, or yeah, oh yeah, this old shirt, it's no big deal. Like, so I was always not accepting love, basically. And was my girlfriend at the time, she's now my fiance. My girlfriend said, hey, I want to go to this live event out in Southern California. This podcast I've been following. She's also a coach. I've been working with her a little, and I'd like to go to this live event. Would you come with me? I don't know anybody. I'm a little, scared about it. Basically, like I don't know anybody. I'm open minded, so we go out to this event, and dude, it was like the whole weekend was like I got way more out of it than so many people, and I just got
Yeah.
cracked open. And so the story I tell is like today we did this kind of a big circle. It's about 40 people. And we passed the microphone around talking about what did we get out of this? What have we like maybe open our eyes to, or what are we still struggling with? And Caitlin's sitting next to me, and I'm holding the microphone. It's my turn. And I look over to her and I say, I just want to love myself the way that you love me. I want to look at me the way you look at me. And I know that I can't give that to you really until I start feeling that for myself. And I just start crying
Mm.
in front of 40 people, none of which I really knew. And JJ, the host, the coach, came up to me afterwards. She's, this doesn't have to stop here. You don't have to like have this breakthrough and then go back. I'm not saying like work with me. You have to work with me, but you have to do something to carry this momentum forward. And I was like, look, I don't know what that means. I'm on the other side of the country. I don't know how we do that. I guess by Zoom, but like, yeah, sign me up. I don't know what it costs. I can afford it though. Like, let's just do it. I don't care. Let's go. And it was just that duration. Like I had to get 19 when I went to rehab, and I had that same feeling of like surrender. Like, all right, cool, let's go. Because I've done therapy. I've done antidepressants in my early 20s. I've done all the self-help stuff, the recovery stuff. And I was like, I'm still like, why am I still not kind of getting there? Just feeling like, what's wrong with me? Why do I still feel defective? So she broke me in like the 6-month course I did with like 4 or 5 other people. And now I have all this material that I can use. I've been using and helping with some other guys with coaching, and it's just killer. So I'm hoping to take this to some of the rehab centers and do like some free workshops and see if I kind of get the material and some momentum going, and then maybe work with some people after. So it's just been humongous.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you're talking about that breakthrough because often that pressure builds up and then just happen, right? And a lot of times people will fall back into the addiction
Yeah.
cycle or, like you mentioned, self-sabotage. But for you, it opened up a different path. What was going on up to that point? I know you touched on the self-critical voice you had, but what do you think allowed for that breakthrough to happen? Like, what was it about that moment that
I was having
created
some
that?
rage episodes, some like road rage episodes, like getting cut off and like,
Mhm.
oh, you're not get away with this. And I'm like, I'm seeing myself outside of myself going, what are you doing? You're a sober man, a good member of this society. You help people. What the heck is wrong with you? Like, what is going on? And the only thing I could always keep tying up was like, I have some unresolved childhood stuff still. How? I'm 39 at the time. Like, how do I still have some unresolved crap? Like, this can't be. I
Mhm.
worked my ass off, and maybe I worked my ass off with everything else. I just kept myself busy because I do a lot of cool, fun
Mhm.
hobbies and do a lot of cool shit. But maybe I'm doing all this other stuff and I'm distracted. I'm not having that peace and
Mhm.
quiet time to allow myself to, like you said, have the connection and have some of these things come in so I can really see what's really going on under the surface. I didn't know. I just couldn't figure it out because I
Yeah.
was too busy. It was too busy, 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 busy. That's how I've always been. Let me get all these degrees and accolades and let me and show everybody what a cool, upstanding guy I am and all these cool, fun toys I have. And it's like, it wasn't fixing it, man. It was still there.
Yeah. And I think you touched on the insecurity piece, right? So you're talking about the achievements, and I can relate to a lot of talked about leading up to this event, having the house, the car, the partner, having all those things. But if the insecure, it's never going to be
Oh,
good enough, right? So you've also told me that you went through with the insecurity, or did that make it worse? I wonder how was that for you navigating the divorce process? Because I think a lot of times those are moments in our life to reflect, and sometimes it's easy to feel like the
mm-hmm.
victim, right? And then just keep moving on with life, or these opportunities to really do an internal audit around, okay, what's going on here? And sometimes that's just part of the growth. There needs to be more that needs to happen further on, as you shared. But what was that for you, and how is the insecurity still manifesting
Yeah,
itself?
it was definitely a mixture of all of it because now it's
Yeah.
like, we've been together for 10 years, married for 4. It's like, well, now I'm going to be alone. What does that mean? Like,
Mm.
am I like, man, am I, if I couldn't like make this real? And, my parents divorced when I was in my early 20s. So I was already well and all that. So it didn't really affect me too much, a little bit emotionally, but it wasn't like devastating. Like I was still a child at home. Right. So, and the funny thing is, I know you didn't really ask me this, but the funny thing is, it actually got closer because we hadn't really had much of a very close relationship outside of sports, and he'd coach me and stuff. But this was like something we could bond through, and he actually helped me with like
Yeah.
some books and different things that helped him get through his divorce from my mom. And I'm had this like, holy crap, my dad's actually helping me out in this way. This is really cool, and it so brought us together
Yeah.
closer. We say I love you more, and every time we talk now, we say I love you to each other. So that helped there, but what was going on was pretty much what was happening about 2 years ago, where I was having rage episodes. I was like, scaring my wife at the time. And what was happening, I was having these like flashbacks of like, holy cow, I'm acting out my marriage that I experienced in
Mhm.
childhood. I'm saying the same things one of them would say. I'm doing the same, hostile, abusive things. I'm not hitting her, but I'm slamming. I'm punching holes in the wall. I'm throwing chairs into the pool. Like I'm out of control. And so this is unacceptable, obviously. And again, I wasn't fully to blame in the relationship because she has her baggage too that wasn't worked on.
Mhm.
But then we went to marriage counseling, and it was the writing was on the wall that she was done with it. But I kept trying
Mhm.
and trying. We're going to marriage counseling, and she's not doing anything that the counselor's saying, like, why don't you guys these? She's going out with her friends and drinking in kind of the way she can. And so finally one day we're with
Mhm.
the therapist. I said, look, we're spending money, time. You're not doing anything that we're supposed to be doing. I'm trying my best to make this work. I want this to work. I know where I've been wrong. I want to do my part, but you're not. If you're done, just please say you're done. Like, should we stop and let's just move on because this is going to suck already. Like, I don't want this to drag out, right? Like, basically, rip the band-aid off me right now. Let me hurt like hell. I don't
Yeah.
like the dragging this out. She said, yeah, I'm done. And I was like,
Yeah.
thank you, finally. And so I got up and we left and we walked out, and it was very sad and disheartening and disappointing. But I vowed at that time, I'm not repeating this. I'm not doing this again.
Yeah.
My next relationship is going to be a loving, intimate one. It's going to be the one that I've always wanted. And that's what it's been now for the last 8 years that we've been together. It's been that.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. And it's
Yeah.
because I learned a lot of those mistakes and masculinity, femininity. I learned what the hell those actually, how they work together, and not to get complacent in
Mhm.
my relationship. So I don't treat my fiance like a buddy, like a pal, even though we're together. Treat her like a
Yeah.
lover. I surprise her still 8 years
Mhm.
later. I surprise her. I say, hey, put on something nice. We're going to go out to dinner tonight, or we're going out to the show. What show are we going to? You'll see when we get there. And she's just like, she gets that
Yeah.
anticipation. And that, like, when you first start dating somebody, you bring that back up
Yeah.
and it keeps it alive. I knew I was not going to do this again. And
Yeah.
yeah, very insecure feeling. Like, who am I as a man? I couldn't make this relationship work. I'm a failure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing all of that. And one of the things to note here is those feelings will still creep up, right? Because the healing journey is never ending, it's ongoing. And I see this too, very similar to yourself, went through divorce, got remarried, and aware of some of those tendencies that come up, some of the internal dialogue, the shame, time to, especially in conversations, especially in difficult conversations. But it's one of the things I've learned is to be in being a part of recovery groups and facilitating them has really helped because I had the opportunity to reflect, but being completely vulnerable and honest, even if I behave or act in a way that I'm not happy about, and that inner critic can kick in saying, well, you've been doing all this work and you still haven't figured it out. It's important, real, like I said, that this is an ongoing journey, but being honest about it, saying, you know what, this is something that came up for me, and this is why I said what I said, or I reacted the way I did. And it brings more
Mm-hmm.
intimacy within the
Yeah.
relationship because when you're able to talk through those things. But I think it's important to recognize that those instances will still happen. Our partners will still trigger us in different ways. Even if we've healed a lot of the past, there will be things that we're not aware of that are still not in our conscious awareness. And those are opportunities to continue learning rather than beating ourselves up. And that insecurity can be debilitating as well. And we talked about shame. But how are you navigating these situations when they do arise? And because it's part of the growth as well,
Yeah.
right?
It's like you said, I noticed when it Caitlin's,
Yeah.
like, for instance, if she's having a rough day, she wants to tell me about her problem, me to fix it. I catch myself and I'll say, you want me to just listen? She's like, yeah, please. Okay, cool. Or I'll say, you should. I have to catch myself and like pull back. Or I'll say something. I say, right, I know you don't want my opinion. You just want me to listen, right? She's like, yeah, please. But then it's really cool because she's matured and grown too. And she's like, hey, I would like your input on this. Can you give me your opinion? Situation. And then things like, say I had a long day at working, like we always all have, and I come home and I do a lot of work at home. I finish up my notes from seeing clients all day at home on my computer. So I'm always hunched over the computer doing this, right? Typing my notes for hours. And I'm doing
Yeah.
that. And I get to where when I knock this out and be done with it and put it to rest, right? And she'll come home and want to talk or do something. And I can catch myself being a little grumpy with her, a little short with her.
Yeah.
And I might do it for about 2 or 3 minutes. And I go, babe, I'm so sorry. Like, it's not about you. She's like, no, I know. I get it. Okay. I said, I'm sorry. Do you mind if I finish, or will you give me like 10 more minutes and then you can have my full
Mhm.
attention? She's like, Absolutely. Or I'll say, you know what? I'm going to give you my attention right now, and I'll push the computer. I'll say, I don't have to finish this right now, even though my head says you got to do it right now. So I've kind of learned some of those
Yeah.
methods that have been super helpful.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And we've talked about, and I think one of the biggest things that help people or enable their recovery is being able to connect to themselves and whatever spiritual connection they are able to resonate
Yeah.
with. How has that been a part of your practice and routine? Because what I've found is that's something I need to attend to almost daily because it's so easy to get disconnected from self, whether it's deadlines, work, stress, things that come up right out of the blue. And then you get disconnected and not be yourself or not feel grounded. And then those little things can irritate you or trigger you. So I've had to be extremely disciplined and I still don't have it figured out because there are times where I can notice myself, the chatter is just going off the rails. And and then when I catch myself, I realize that I've spent pretty much the entire pilot, not really paid attention to my internal state. But it's
It
a
froze.
diligent practice, right? So I'm curious to understand your process and how you managed it.
Uh-oh.
What's the question?
No, you were saying the chatter. It cut out at the. You were talking about the chatter and
Oh,
the
I was just
discipline.
saying yeah, how do you how have you been able to build in the connection piece
Yeah.
and build it into your daily routine? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's ebbed and flowed. A lot of things, like just like what I believe my higher power is, the label I give it, like that's ebbed and flowed. Like there's been times where I've been super ritualistic. I have to I have to be on my knees when I pray in the morning. I have to be on my knees when I pray. Like that's changed. I don't feel as confined and restricted. Have a conversation with what I believe in as my higher power, and that's changed too, right? I grew up a Irish, Italian, Catholic kid, right? So I was like, I had that instilled and smushed into me, right? And so that I don't believe in that God anymore. That was not helpful or conducive to me getting sober. That wasn't what I needed. So that's changed. And it's even changed in the last probably 3 years. I've really come more into, law of attraction. I've been really, really influenced a lot by that. So that's
Yeah.
really helps me with, things where we like energy and vibes, but like really putting that into practice and what that means. Cause just waking up in the morning, I'm going to be positive today. Like that doesn't help. It's like whistling in the dark, right? It's like, how am I going to
Yeah.
do that? I have some of the practices like I'm doing this 8-minute visualization that, I'll take different pictures of things that I want to manifest or experience in life, travel, whatever the case is. And then I do an appreciation journal. I try to do that every morning. Again, mornings, certainly not every morning. And I also do I added to that like a 3 to 5 things I want that I'm looking for. Some of those are things that I actually have scheduled on the calendar that are going to come up. I'm looking forward. Like I'm like going to the scuba diving trip to Bonaire, going to Italy, but maybe there's other things that I don't have scheduled that I'm looking forward to just in life happening. So I like that because it gives me like positive things. So, and then I have guys that I've talked to that are in recovery that I can talk about things off of. And so I found for me, talking to people like you, talking to people, that's where I get that connection really more so from my higher power because I feel it inside when I do it alone and I actually like can slow down and have some quiet time. But more I get it from hanging out with other guys that are kind of on the same track as me that really helps
Mhm.
out. So it's been cool just talk to my higher power all day long, going about something's going on. Like you said, I got that chatter, things are going, bouncing around, and I go, all right, hey, you know what? Who's in charge here? What are we going to do about this? Like, what can I actually deal with right now? And I can figure that out. And then like, give me this really cool. I have you sit here, this feelings and needs list here that helps me out a
Yeah.
lot. So this is super helpful that anytime I have it, especially a negative feeling, what's the need that I had that I'm perceiving that's not being met, that's attached to that feeling. And then the third step, what can I do to get that need met without trying to like, put it on someone else? So those are all been super
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting you touched on I think children or even young adults, we often just accept other people's definition of God, right? How they perceive it. And I mean, people could perceive it in different ways, and that's okay. But it be often a turnoff for a lot of people, and they just completely dispense with the
Yeah.
idea or the notion of God completely, right? They just reject it because it's like, well, it doesn't make sense to me, and These actually have this definition of God or not actually good people, whatever the case may be. And then you completely reject the idea. And then I think, as you've shared, what I can relate to is when you have that breakthrough, it actually allows you to understand it in a different way. And you have this level of humility around, okay, I don't have to have it all figured
Mhm.
out, but I can just accept whatever feels right to me today. And then that also evolves with time, but it also gives you compassion for the people that maybe have a limited definition based on your perspective. So I wonder if that was like your process, as you said, you know, your definition of God changed with
Yeah,
time.
it's right. It's like I always
Yeah.
picture in my mind like a picture of me or what I think it is, and a lot of times my head is gigantic in that picture, and God's kind of in the corner, and then that's when when I'm trying to do things my way, and guess what? Things aren't really working out all that great because that's kind of been my track record. And then when I change those things, I those God's really huge in the picture, like the sun and like this little tiny thing down here, like things are an ass. Life is like going fantastic. It's great because my fingerprints aren't necessarily on everything. I'm just going with the flow, taking the action, and things are
Yeah.
just kind of falling into place. And like you said, the humility. And then when I start getting like we talked about before, oh yeah, look at all this I did, and I did this, and I did this, and oh, look at this, and this person, me, and it's like, where's God in all this? And then
Yeah.
the crap starts to hit the fan again. It's like, oh crap, I did it again. I took her will. So it's about kind of like figuring those things out. And now it's also like I've come more around 2 years of like, it's okay to have some pride and like take pride in the work we do and take credit for what we did. I've also played a part in a lot of stuff. Like a lot of the fear I had in doing a lot of the things that I've done. And that's been the best growth for me the last 3 years has been doing these really super difficult, hard things that my head's like, nah, dude, that's going to kill you. Like, don't do that. That's scary. Don't get on a podcast. Don't have a boxing match. Don't, do all these, don't jump out of an air, all these things. Like that's, you're right. It's terrible. And then I do these things that don't die. And my brain to go, oh, it's okay. We can do these difficult things. Hell, getting sober at 19, that was the hardest thing you'll ever do in your entire friggin' life. The rest of this stuff is cupcakes. Like, why are you afraid? But because I'm human. That's what we do. We have our
Right.
instincts and our fears. So to kind of
Yeah.
reverse those things and deflate the ego. And I think that's what recovery is all about is like we talked about,
Yeah.
deflating the ego, bringing that thing back down the right
Yeah.
size.
Yeah. And it's crucial that what you've highlighted, because sometimes we forget how we've been able to overcome difficult situations because we get so caught up in the fear in front of us, which, relatively speaking, may not be as bad as some of the other things we've overcome in the past. So it's important to remind ourselves that, hey, if I manage to go get through that situation, I'll be fine here. It's just you need to have that faith sometimes, and I think that's it's interesting, right? It's such a fine balance. Like sometimes we have that faith and we're able to walk through situations, and sometimes we have to rediscover it depending on what we're trying to navigate. Now, you touched on connecting with other men as well. And one of the things in recovery that's so important is to recognize, even within our social circle, who's serving us and who isn't
Mhm.
serving us. And it's not, again, meant to be judgmental, but sometimes people are not serving us in our
Yeah.
journey, right? And they might be doing their own growth in different capacities, and we're on a different path. That can be very tough for people too, right? Especially if you've had long standing friendships and close ways, and having to go on a different path and finding people that perhaps are on the same page when it comes to
Mhm.
recovery. How's that been for you? Because I know you touched on it's really important for you to connect with other men who are doing something similar.
Well, I haven't had to like cut anybody off necessarily. That's a good friend or something. But
Yeah.
sometimes it just kind of drifts apart. Just notice, and I
Yeah.
always say like, if something's a priority, am I really in that?
Mm.
If my friendship to so and so is really as much of a priority as to, how often am I seeing him? How often are we grabbing a bite or a coffee? It's like, well, it's actually been a hell of a lot less the last 6 months. So like, and I'm not saying it's not important, but if it is, so I'm going to start reaching out to him and making more of an effort to get together. So that's been really helpful. And then again, I think it is important. I don't like we're using the word judge either, but it's almost take inventory to where somebody is, how they're living a life, what they're doing. Does that align with mine? Because what's going to happen, right? It's like watching the news. Am I watching good, positive, upbeat news, or am I feeding myself a bunch of this junk that, first of all, I have no control over it. I can't do anything about it. And how is that making me feel? So like, the acid test, how do I feel when I do this? How do I feel when I'm with this person? How am I talking to this person? And if there's something going on with me, I have to be honest with that and say, this is not good for me. Just like being in a relationship, if she's not willing to grow and grow with me, not statistical, right? But I'm going to outgrow that person. And then what's going to be left substance in our relationships? It's the same thing with even family members. If I have a
Yeah.
toxic family member, as dealing with people that are newly in recovery with triggers stuff, it's like, what do we tell them? Get away. So when clean at 19, I was going to do this rehab for a month. I'm going to go right back home because I need to be a good son again and a good brother and a good friend. And I definitely need to get that ex-girlfriend back and need to show her that like I got my stuff together now. I got to fix everything right away. My mentors are like, dude, relax, like stay here, build your recovery network. Because if you hurry back and go home and you don't stay sober, it's all for nothing. Not to mention you're probably going to die
Yeah.
before too long. So stay here, see what happens. And before you know it, man, 10 years had gone by and I never went back to live at home. I became my own person.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like having
Yeah.
people that can, the checks and balances. And for me, it's been really important to do a cons list. What are the pros of doing this
Yeah.
and the cons and vice versa? And that's what's always kind of like shaped it out. And then, like you said before, the whole faith aspect is having a track record. Like the longer we do something, build that track record. And I always say I fail forward, I fall upstairs.
Yeah.
Because I've done a lot of dumb stuff in my 22 years of recovery that you would think, holy crap. But it ended up like opening the doors for all these other things I didn't even know. Like for me to be a nurse practitioner, to have a DEA license and to prescribe medicines and do all the stuff that I do, that wasn't supposed to happen. That wasn't in my mind in the cards. And so many more examples. I won't bother wasting time with like things that are like, that's not supposed to, but that only happened because you fell on your face. If you didn't fall on your face over here doing that stupid thing, those other avenues never would have opened. And I believe those things were supposed to shape out that way. Just like getting clean at
Yeah.
19, I was supposed to pass out on the couch and, my parents think that I was dead. Like that was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Otherwise I was literally going to die.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I'm hearing from that is the courage to confront those challenging situations, to really know where you sit, right? And it's so easy to get stuck in that comfort. But we've talked about it over and over, to be able to step into that fear and having that faith that I've done this before, or what's the worst thing that's going to
That's it.
happen? Maybe I'm not ready for it and I'll learn something from this. And it's like climbing that mountain, right? Eventually you'll be able to get up to that height and then realize that, okay, there's another one to climb. But that is like, and you touched on this whole idea of having to remove yourself from the family to enable your recovery. And then with your divorce, you were able to at least get closer to your dad. And that's something I experienced too. But one of the other things you talked about, or at least you had shared with me, was this breakthrough you had with your mom. What was that like? And when did that happen as part of your journey?
Yeah, I think we talked about before we recorded.
Yeah.
So it was back in Halloween. So like the end, I have again something my coach gave me about. It's like a couples dialogue, but it doesn't have to be a couples. There's a sender and a receiver, scripted, and you kind of fill in the blanks. So it can feel a little robotic and fake first, but as you go through it, you're basically like, in therapy, you're reflecting to each other, and you're saying, okay, so what I hear saying is, I treated you blank, 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 or your perception of the child who was this, that, and the other. And for me, it was the biggest hurdle because when I got clean, when I got sober, I couldn't talk to my mom. I was so toxic for me. And she wasn't doing it on purpose. It was just her baseline. It's what her default was. Like I would get this voicemail. If I didn't call for like a week or two, I would get this voicemail. Hey, it's me, your mom. It would be nice if you called and like, talk to your sisters once and guilt trip, guilt trip, guilt trip. So I had all these buttons she was pressing. And so the guys in my recovery and doing therapy, which was helpful with a lot of the family stuff, was learning to connect those buttons. So when she pressed them, it was kind of just like dead silence, right? So doing this dialogue, my mom was helpful in that, 2 or 3 years ago when I hit that bottom again, it was childhood related. And so I knew this was long overdue. And so we did this and we got off script a little bit. And part of me, while it was getting off script, I need to like control this. I was like, no, dude, just let it go. Let it go. And my mom was crying. She was breaking through. I was crying because she was crying and it was getting emotional. And the hardest part really was probably not soothing her, because my default was like, I have to take care of her. I have to be responsible for her feelings and soothe her. But it's like, no, no, mom, you need to cry. I'm not going to tell you don't cry. I'm not going to hug you. I'm not even going to touch you. I'm going to let you sit with this and feel this and let it process. That was the hardest part. And then me having those
Yeah.
same emotions and feelings come up. So it was huge. It was just a giant breakthrough. Talk about a lot more stuff since then. And she said that like she had really felt a distance between us over the last few years. I just realized, I just thought I was kind of living my life as a 40-year-old adult man, you know? So it was
Yeah.
giant.
And I think in recovery, usually those relationships, and often it is, you touched on earlier, our relationships with family members. And sometimes you need that separation or distance or even set boundaries. But we talk about hooks, right? So they know how to hook us in because there's that established pattern from the beginning. And it's easy to get sucked into it. And like you said, you have to kind of separate yourself and recognize what those buttons were so you can fall into those traps. And that takes time, right? And then you have to set those boundaries. But the other piece around having that conversation with your mom, I think it's easy to have
Mm-hmm.
expectations, right? That, oh, this is the response I may get. They may say yes. They may accept responsibility and everything's going to be great. And then, as we expected, we're only setting ourselves up for failure. What I've learned is you go in with the mindset that you're doing this because it's good for your healing, irrespective of what the
Mm-hmm.
outcome is, right? This is something you need to do. What was your mindset going into that conversation? Did you have any expectations? And yeah, what were you kind of going
Yeah.
in?
So it definitely kind of childlike fantasies like, oh, this is going to be the big break. This is going to like heal
Yeah.
everything. But then when I would temper myself, I would say, okay, first off, I know she's open to this. So I'm not afraid to ask
Mhm.
her, hey, can we have some time to do this exercise? I knew she would be open to it because, you know, she respects the hell out of me and she loves who I am as a man. And you know, is very proud of what I've done with my life and my recovery that they gave me, right? So she'll do anything for me. I know that hands down. So I was expecting to have a pretty good breakthrough. I wasn't expecting some of the stuff she said that was really cool for
Yeah.
me to hear, which was her to talk about her trauma, her stuff with my
Mm.
grandfather, and talk about that. And for her to say, I wish I would have done this with your grandfather, that, you
Mm.
know, I didn't cry when he presented towards it. I'm going, holy shit, you're like 60 something years old. You got to be kidding me. And it made me go, Doc, I'm so glad we did this because I don't want to be in that same boat. And I can see again,
Yeah.
it gives me a little bit of empathy that, like, okay, so shit does trickle downhill. So he's
Yeah.
treated you this way. Obviously, you treated me this way. It's not that I was a defective, you know, POS kid,
Yep.
you know, or a bad kid like I always
Yeah.
thought. But it was never good enough for people. People have been telling me my whole life, oh, your parents did the best they could. Like that never helped. That was like, well, their best sucked.
Right.
Their best wasn't good enough. So it wasn't until I could actually have this kind of eye-opening empathy more so than
Mhm.
pity. Oh, okay. That makes sense. And I'd always heard some
Right.
stories. Well, not always, last like 10 years, I'd
Yep.
heard some stories about stuff my grandfather did. Some, you know, he was a World War II veteran and just, you know, cantankerous at times, off the handles, you know. So like it wasn't really surprising, but it was cool for her to kind of like open up that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a gift. It's not only something that you're able for yourself, but you're enabling that healing for your parents and you're breaking those generational traumas.
Yeah.
And it's so important to take on that responsibility and your part, right? So, and we've touched on so many things that I think not only men, women can relate to on this recovery piece or everything we've talked about, even in our growth. I think there's a lot of commonality,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's that parental stuff, there's our own ability to connect with ourselves, and then how we show up in our relationships, having that vulnerability, building healthy connections in general. Now, when you're doing work with men, what are some of the things that you're talking about? And do you see some of the commonalities in your story and what you're encountering with other people?
Yeah. A lot of it is denial, right? Like a lot of it
Mm.
is walls being built up and kind of like arms crossed like this and like, what are we talking about and what are we doing? And I like what I'm doing because they're not going to really work with me or pay me unless they're kind of ready, right? Just like people in
Yep.
recovery. So it's not as drastic as that, all, which is nice. But it's kind of like, how is this going to help me? So there's a lot of skepticism, like that, like that's a little
Mm.
woo woo sounding, and that's kind of like, you know, girly, feminine sound. But I'm like, you know, it's a test again. Like when I look in the mirror, do I, how do I feel about the
Mm.
man I see in the mirror right now? And like for me, for a while, I would flick myself off as I would see myself in the mirror. I would say, you POS, or, you know, you skinny this or that, or, you know, you're looking like this or that. So it's like, the heck is this coming from? So a lot of us have the same
Mhm.
kind of stuff. So it's kind of trying to like convince them, like you said, to be vulnerable and try some things that may not make any sense. It's kind of like when I first got sober, it was like, well, what does a lot of these things have to do with staying sober? And I didn't realize underneath the
Mhm.
surface, it was about connection. It was like, it was about feeling a
Yeah.
part of. That's why we
Yeah.
cleaned ashtrays and we set up chairs and we made coffee and we drove people and we answered the phone and made phone calls, because it made me feel a part of, because I felt
Mhm.
so alone for so long. I felt like nobody understood me, right? Like you hear about the terminal uniqueness. Like that's how I felt. And so a lot of men
Yeah.
come to me feeling the same way. My wife doesn't understand. She's nagging me all the time, or my mom is pestering me about this or that. And so it's about helping them see it, but also like taking the lead role and being vulnerable. And so that starts with saying, well, here's my soul, and just bearing it to you and saying, well, look, I get it, because all of this stuff that we've been sharing for the last hour we've been talking, like I share a lot of that stuff and some deeper stuff with them that makes them go, oh, okay. So it's okay if I tell you about
Yeah.
the time when this happened or that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. And I think, like you said, the willing to be there. And sometimes it's all about perspective too, right? Like we touched on it before, the inner critic could kick in. But for a lot of men, the willingness takes time. But even recognizing that I am here, right? I'm sitting here, that is
Yeah.
progress. And one day I will get to the point where I'll feel comfortable and open up and share. But even when you're absorbing from other people, that is
Mm-hmm.
progress too, because you're hearing some part of yourself in someone else's story, or you're hearing how they're navigating a difficult situation. And at least you feel like you're not alone in it. And I think all of that is progress. But when we're beating ourselves up and we're stuck in shame, it's easy to lose sight of that and just say, well, I just come here and do nothing.
So it's about,
Yeah.
because again, me at 19, like, what do I have to do with the 60-year-old guy that's, you know, tons of DUIs and this and that? It's like, but we had that, I could loneliness. I could identify with feeling like nothing was working out. I could identify with like feeling like, you know, everybody got the manuscript or the manual for how to be a human being. And like, that wasn't put in my crib when I was a baby or something on that. But like,
Yeah.
that identification, even if it's like, hey, we're all a bunch of F ups. We're all F up together, right? Like that's what we do. Like I played on sports my entire life. So I knew being on a team, having a common goal together, and that's what it was in recovery. And so when guys want to do the coaching thing, it's about let's learn together and grow together. It's not, you know, I'm your my follower. That's somewhat, you know, maybe half blind leading the blind, but like let's kind of work on this to go together. So that's the cool thing, is like French and develop, which is like the
Yes.
best part.
Yeah. It's one of the things I've really appreciated is, as much as I don't look at myself as the leader, more as a guide, but even then, I'm also learning and growing through
Exactly.
that process. So I appreciate that perspective too. And Patrick, I really appreciate your vulnerability and everything you've shared with us today. But is there anything else you feel like we didn't touch on that is of value and something that the listeners can also learn from your own story that you would want to touch on?
I think it's, you know, really basically, how do I help somebody in my life doesn't want help or doesn't know they need help? Is about how do I reflect that to them? So that's like the
Yeah.
big piece, right? Is you got somebody struggling, how to do it without sometimes it's just kind of checking in on them once in a while. Hey, how are we doing today? Hey,
Yeah.
what's going on? But mostly, as you know, it's about, it is in this respect being the leader and leading by. So start doing some healthy
Yeah.
habits if somebody's kind of let themselves go, whether it's physically, medically,
Yeah.
emotionally, and then kind of that they join along, or invite them. Hey, honey, you want to go for dinner for 20 minutes tonight? And just kind of like somebody into stuff. And then eventually, you know, all these doors can open up, and then they start like, now they're doing you, or they're doing meditations with you, or they're going on these retreats with you. That's like real stuff. Or now they're working with a therapist or a coach that before they were completely closed doing. So I think that's the
Yeah,
biggest thing is how do I help somebody else?
for sure. For sure. No, that's great. Now, for listeners that want to learn more or your work, what are some ways they can do that?
The biggest one is, or easiest, probably my website, patrickcasey.com. So that's Patrick and then Casey, CASEYJR. I'm also on Instagram at Patrick Casey Jr. And then Facebook too, Patrick
Yeah.
MC Jr. Patrick. And on my website, I have 2 free courses, online courses if people want to watch. It's 60 minutes long. One of them is about 3 steps to breaking through self-destructive patterns, a lot of stuff we talked about. And then the other one is, I kind of like it, really happy with it. It's the title is Mail Ordered Support, ME, Mail Ordered Support. And it's 5 ways to deliver help to the man in your life. So kind of a play on words with mail delivery. So it's pretty cool, man. So I've had a lot of really great back from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Patrick, again, for coming on here and sharing
Thanks for
story.
having me on. I appreciate the time.